Hello, everybody. My name is Carter Hall. Welcome to another episode of the What Really Happened podcast. I'm joined by a good friend of mine. Her name is Abby Gonzales. Abby, how's it going?
Great. I'm currently right now dealing with a little bit of a sickness. Just visited family recently, and so of course I got sick for the ending time because kids.
Yeah,
But doing great today so far.
yeah, no, it's that time of year though. I guess it's just everybody's getting that illness. I guess
Yeah.
that time of year. But yeah, thank you for coming on, making time and everything like that. I know you're kind of seems like you're kind of a busy person right now, so thank you for making
Yeah.
the time out.
Yeah,
So
and apologies right now that the room's like literally a disaster in the process of moving right now. But I have a coworker who's a strong advocate for your background, say a lot about your personality. And I think this says a lot about my mental state right now. Not fully chaotic, but pretty close.
no, you're good. I mean, I can't even fathom moving. I mean, from one place to another. It's like right now, it's like all the stuff, all the everything like that. But you're all good. So um, you and I met back in Lubbock not that long
Mhm.
ago. So that was pretty interesting because both a little bit backstory of how we met. So both of our mothers actually are like best friends and everything. They grew up
Yeah.
together, and that's how necessarily how we met. And I was pretty awkward because I'm an awkward person as it is. So I my apologies if like I always say I'm always the awkward person in the room. So um do you recall meeting like what were like how can I say this? You were talking to me like when we met and anything like that. You're talking about how you were going back to tech to get your master's and anything like that, right?
Yeah, I've put my degree on pause. My fiance is actually the one who's going to be returning to school.
That's right.
His big goal right now is he really wants to be a history professor. He's always been kind of a big history buff. His major was in economics, but his minor was in history, and I think his true passion's always been history. He did a bit of business work for a bit. He got his master or MBA, and so he did the business world for a bit, hated it, and decided I want to go into education instead. I'd just much rather that. So he's actually been subbing recently and he's just loving it. And I really think for a person of his personality type, being a teacher fits a lot better than the business world because the business world for the more, I guess, business sided people is
Hmm.
very cutthroat. And he's a very compassionate guy. He's a giant teddy bear. I think that's why I love him so much. But he has a true passion for history. And I think people that when they have that true passion make amazing teachers.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I got to meet him too when I was in Lubbock, and I was like, "Oh man, these are really cool people." Telling me all these amazing things that y'all are doing. I was like, "This is so cool." I mean, that y'all are doing so many great things. I mean,
Mhm.
we're kind of talking off air and everything like that about how I was a big history guy, and when you said that, I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, he's going to get his master's in history and all that." I was like, "That's been pretty cool." I mean, the higher education, like education in my family,
Hmm.
I can only speak for myself. Is like has been a big thing. So when I was
Hmm.
like, I was telling y'all, when I met you, I was like, yeah, I think like, higher people going to get their masters. It's an amazing thing. So the fact
Yeah.
that both of y'all were going to get that, make that a goal is, I think, really commendable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a very big advocate for education. I think that also comes from my parents. Both of them only have their high school diplomas. And the one thing they wanted from me and all my siblings, which, fun fact about me, I'm the youngest of five, so I have a ton of siblings.
Oh, cool.
um, but she pushed for all of us to go to college and at least get something, get a trade or get a degree. And that's pretty much what all of us did. And I think uh, because of like that big push, it made me appreciate education more, like realizing like they didn't get the opportunity. So if you're blessed with that opportunity, definitely take it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my mom was the same way. I mean,
Mhm.
she was so I'm not sure if I ever said this on the podcast at all in its history, but my mom was the youngest of eight kids.
Mhm.
So it's her and my uncle, the two youngest of the eight, were the only ones to graduate from college.
Mhm.
And so after that, it feels like all my cousins and everybody were like, they really pushed education. So like almost everybody like, okay, same thing, like they wanted everybody to go get their education. They really made it a thing to go, okay, college is a big thing. So
Yeah.
do whatever you want. You can go to trade school, do the same thing, but as long as you do something with their life, kind of
Yes.
thing. So, um, I was like, I always at the back of my mind, I was like, I knew I was going to do something, but it really wasn't until like my junior, senior year of high school. I was like, okay, it's really that time of year. Okay, I really got to decide right now, kind of thing. So, um, but that's pretty interesting when I was talking to you when I first met you,
Mhm.
that you're going in for computer, you went in for computer science, right?
Yes.
Cool. So, like, what kind of like, what drew you to that? Was there anything in particular, like, this is really interesting, this is really catching my eye?
Yeah, for me, I'd say it was almost a fluke. In high school, you know those tests they make you take that's like, oh, you'd be really good in this job field, you'd be really good in this job field. Two of my sisters are educators, and the first one I ever did in school, I think about freshman or sophomore year, was teacher, and I was like, I do not want to be a teacher. I don't want to be my sisters. I love my sisters. I don't want to be my sisters.
I understand that,
Um,
yeah.
and so I kind of started thinking, I was like, what do I really want to do? Who has a job that I think is cool? And I looked at our IT people at our school, and I was like, their job seems cool. Like all they do is fix computers all day and get to hide out in a room and not talk to people. That sounds amazing for me. I don't like talking to people, which is a lie. I love talking to people. In high school, I would say that. As an adult, I'm very much a lot more extroverted, but still somewhat introverted.
Yeah.
Um, and so I took another one of those tests, and it said, oh, hey, you make a really good IT specialist. So I was like, cool. So I'll start looking what type of IT jobs are out there. And when I went into college, and excuse if there's background noise, my cat is, of course, being ornery as ever, where she's just prowling across my desk. She chooses the best time. She'll probably end up popping in the screen in a bit here.
No,
She's
no worries at all. I love animals,
a
so no
mess.
worries. Not
um
good.
yeah, but getting back to what I was saying, I went into college, and I kind of knew I was at a very small school, and because of that, my graduating class was only 60 people. Being number 10 in a class of 60, you're not really in the top 10 percentile. So I knew I wasn't going to get into university. And I was a kid that grew up with dyslexia. I'd struggled in some classes very hard. I always pulled really good grades, but it also was a lot harder for me to pull really good grades when a lot of other kids just had that natural, like, they just got it. And it took me, um, I'd say for each student that they just got it, it'd take me 10 minutes to get the I just got it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I decided, I was like, I'll just go to a junior college first just to get a good idea of what I want to do, or like if college is really meant for me, just to make sure I'm not getting in way over my head. And that's where I met my first advisor. And I believe that was Alan Worley, who's funny enough now the dean of students at South Plains College.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
um, he's either dean of students or dean of arts and science, but amazing guy. He gave me some really good advice where he was like, try computer science. He's like, computer science can either go IT or software engineering. So if you want to go more business side, if you want to go more computer, like just programming side, do that. And to be honest, out of a lot of the other CS majors I met, I had never coded in my life until college. And so the first time when I wrote my first program, that everybody's first is always the pop up that just says, hello world. My mind was just blown. I was like, I love this. I love this type of learning. And I just fell in love with it there. I think it helps. I had a professor, Charlotte Young, who is a woman, and having a woman CS teacher as a young woman going into the field was very kind of vital, because going into it, you're warned it'll be a lot more men than women. And you're kind of at first, like, I was a kid that grew up, all my friends were boys, like all my best friends are boys. I was like, oh, that's not weird at all. They don't warn you, a lot of those guys are a lot more nerdy men and very awkward, and just, and not saying that's a bad thing. That most of my friends and I myself am very awkward. But it is a little jarring at first, because you're like, oh, I don't really feel welcome, because like none of us in this room know how to socialize with each other. But having a strong lecturer who's also a woman that like represents like your minority in that really helps.
Yeah, it really helps a lot. I mean, when you're talking about that, like you're like learning the code and anything like that, I found that really interesting too. Because like I I also went to a junior college too,
Mhm,
right out of high school, and just because like I said, I really didn't know what I wanted to do to like my junior
mhm.
senior of high school. So I don't know if they did this at your high school as well, but in mine. towards like the end or beginning or towards the middle of the end of the year, different colleges around from like the area, Amarillo area, like WT, Texas Tech, UNT,
Hmm.
all these different colleges would come and talk to you. And if you have any questions, you can talk to them there and blah, 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 and do all that
Yeah.
stuff. Prepare you for the next step in life kind of thing. And um, I was talked to, funny enough, someone from Texas Tech.
Hmm.
And I was like, when I was in a senior in high school, I was like, talking about like what my interests were. Like, yeah, I liked writing, but also like my junior year, I took a journalism class and a audio video production class. So I was really out of those two like classes I just randomly picked on my
Hmm.
schedule. I was like, I really like this stuff. And I told the tech person, the recruiter, and I was like, she goes, this media communicate, we offer this program and everything like that. I was like, I looked into it my senior year. I was like, that seems pretty cool. And then but like I said, I went to junior college and got my associates in general studies, like all the
Hmm.
basics and stuff. So, but most of my, if not all my electives were like communication based, like all
Yeah.
the classes they pretty much offered. All the communication professors knew me more than my actual like core class teachers, like history and science and all that. And I want to tell you, I am not the most science or math savvy person ever. I would do better in my English and history classes than I would my math or science.
Hmm.
But yeah, so by the time I was like when I after my started first couple semesters, excuse me, at the community college I went to, I like, yeah, this is the field I want to. Then like he said, you have that like eureka kind of moment, like, oh, this is for me. Okay, this is
Hmm.
definitely the route I want to go. So when you were talking about like the first time like you started coding and anything like that, I was like, oh, that sounds exactly something I did I say moment.
Yeah.
Um, so when you go into code, like okay, so I'm a student, okay? I say this every day, and I don't know much about computer science or
Hmm.
science rather. I barely passed biology one with a 75, okay? I don't know anything about science. I get lost in that world. So the science overall, but like how would you describe computer science to like your average students like myself?
Yeah. Um, I think for me, like especially explaining it to others, it kind of like with your background, I would explain it a bit differently than to like somebody like my parents' age.
Mm,
Um, for you, I would say computer science is pretty much we're not IT, we're the people who make the apps that IT and
yeah.
everybody else uses, the apps that you do day to day. So like you think of your Facebooks of the world, your gosh, even your operating system, that's all computer science. That's all computer scientists. I think it's kind of hard to differentiate for like the older generation because they hear computers and they're like, oh, you're the IT guy. You come
Yeah.
and turn my computer on and off and tell me it's working now.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not what I do at
No,
all.
not at all.
But a lot of people think that's what CS is. And it's really more so the fact that we're building out the applications that you use daily to day, or just like we write the instructions to tell the computer what to do. So like we're the reason that it knows what it's supposed to do when it turns on.
Mhm.
IT is the reason that it can turn on, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
for sure. Makes total sense. I understand. Yeah, for
Yes,
sure.
it's
Go ahead. I'm
oh
sorry.
sorry. I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
it's kind of like the difference between like a orthodontist and a dentist. Like an orthodontist sees teeth completely different than a dentist does. The dentist is actually going in there and tearing your teeth out and fixing
Yeah.
it. The orthodontist is like, this is why it's this way.
For sure. I mean, I don't miss those days of going to the orthodontist. Don't get me wrong. Those are the roughest 2.5 years of my life. So, but yeah, I mean, uh, I was talking to somebody other day. I think it was my mom or dad or someone,
Mhm.
and I was trying to explain like I understand what you're saying, like trying to like
Mhm.
tell people like there's different ways to approach it. So I was trying to understand, like tell them like I don't I have a most basic understanding of what computer science is. I know y'all develop,
Mhm.
you said software, like there's someone or people, a group of people who developed like the Facebook app or different things of
Mhm.
that nature. Social media, which we're gonna get into, I think, later and everything like that. But um, so I was trying to explain it to him. I was like, yeah, I'm having, Abby's. I told my mom, I think, I was like, I'm having Abby come on and talk about my podcast. And she's like, oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. What are you going to talk about? And she goes, I'll talk about like computer science and everything. I kind of gave her the rundown. And I was trying to
Mhm.
tell her like what computer science is and everything like that, how it's different from it's technology, I think, kind of based. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
This is your field. I don't want to mess it up or come like step on your toes. But I was like trying to explain it to her. I was like, she's the one that's kind of creating the app. Like
Mhm.
if we were to put it, for example, like creating something, creating the initial, she's doing like they're doing like
Yeah.
the heavy lifting, and people in my field, in my communications field, we're kind of doing the one, or we're doing the ones like we're creating the graphics that you see, we're creating like the
Mhm.
content that goes on that stuff. So it's
Yeah.
like see, there's it's like peanut butter and jelly. We're coming together to make one thing, kind of thing. If that makes any sense. So I was like, how do I explain this to someone like he doesn't
Yeah.
understand? Like we're very tech. Your degree and my degree are very like technology based and anything like that,
Mhm.
but it's hard to explain it to someone who is different. It's like didn't understand, like didn't have that stuff, probably back in
Yeah.
the day. So I was like, like you like your description is much more better than mine ever will be. So obviously, but um, what something do you think? What most people like misunderstand about like computer science? Do you think you kind of like talked about it earlier? I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like you're kind of
No
talking about
worries.
like what was there anything other than just people coming in and fixing your computer? Was there anything like other things that people misunderstand?
Yeah, I think it's more so that like right there. It's the a lot of people really think IT and CS are the same thing. They think a software engineer and an IT specialist are two of the same, and they are very much not two of the same.
No.
Uh, I'm also like I don't think people realize this as a software engineer and as the company that I work at, well, software developer right now, eventually an engineer. Um, we actually have to go to IT to get help a lot because there's things on our computer that's just messed up that we don't know why it's doing that. And it's, I know there's times I've had family members come up to me and they're like, why is my computer doing this? I'm like, I don't know. I can sit here and Google it for a few hours and try to help you. Like, I'm good at using Google, but I am not an IT person.
Yeah, I would do the same like thing. I tend to be like the in my family. I'm the one like
Mhm.
my I have two older brothers, and the one's like a finance and economics major, so he's really good with like numbers and math.
Yeah.
And I have another brother who's like a physical therapy assistant who's going his way to be a physical therapist. So he's
Mhm.
real science, and I'm like I don't have either one of them. So like I'm the one in the family who's like when there's technology issues, everybody kind of goes to me a little bit. So like okay, like my app's not working. What's going on? Like okay, let's go to Wi-Fi. Let's see what's going on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of doing that. Like let's fix the issue, kind of thing. But so that's kind of funny though. Like what's been like? Do you have a pet peeve at all? Like in your field, like anybody who like outsider looking in, is there anybody who like oh, that man, I really don't. Not necessarily about that. But like, is there like, do you have a pet peeve in this field at all?
I try
Like,
to keep them low if I do have any. It's hard to say now because I think I've just gotten so used to um for me, the generational gap between me and my sis, like my oldest sibling is 17 years. So there's always been a bit of a barrier for I have to understand like there's always going to be that generational gap there. And there's some people I work with at work who are also developers who are in their 60s, close to 70s. Um, so I try to always be very understanding when I'm explaining things. I don't want to come off as like, because I know for a lot of the older generation, they're like, oh, these young kids are just rude about what they're explaining to me. Like, why'd you explain that to me that way? Like, you could have just been a bit nicer. And so I try to have compassion for that. I'd say the only pet peeve is when people overestimate how much you know, and they're like, oh, so you can just uh I guess this is the type that I don't like is people that pitch apps to me and they're like, yeah, you could get that done pretty quick, right? No, that's not how development works.
no,
Like
no, I've
they're,
heard.
oh, go
Go ahead.
ahead.
You go ahead. I'm sorry. I've been cutting you off all day. I'm sorry.
No worries. I do the same thing. My brain just cuts and chops and I end up pausing. um for me, it'll be like people will be like, oh, yeah, can you make this app that does this really cool, intricate thing? And what they're describing to me is something like a big company like Facebook, Amazon, Apple would have to make. I'm like, that's a multi person job. That's not
Yeah.
a me job.
Yeah. That's kind of funny. I mean, I've heard stories before, like people like coming in, like they have ideas,
Mhm.
like, hey, like if the app's already created, like, hey, can we add this to it, like last minute? I've heard people
Yeah.
like, well, that's going to take forever to like code and program that. I've heard stuff like that before too. I mean, I can only imagine because like for me, like I create like when I create videos and stuff like that, I know how like
Mhm.
tedious I am when I'm trying to edit a video.
Yeah.
Like there's crunch time. Okay, we need to this video saw it, but we need to get it edited in an hour or less than
Mhm.
an hour, 30 minutes, 20 minutes sometimes, and working in my, internship and anything like that, I was like, okay, we need to get some of this stuff done now. And there's people who
Mhm.
like sometimes that's not the case, like if you want something great, it's like going to take like a minute. So I can understand where people are like, what? I thought you were like good at this. I'm like, I'm all right, but we're not going to get this done now. So just that's one
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from too. So I get it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to misconstrue, and I imagine, especially with you, like you're saying just there, like with video editing, I'm sure you've had friends that are like, "Oh, hey, can you edit this for me real quick?" And you're like, "That's not a real quick job. This is
Yeah.
going to take time job." And I think there's always people don't really understand that. I think it's if more would put in perspective of, do you ever just hand a mechanic and say, "Hey, replace my engine"? That's not going to take a short amount of
Yeah.
time. Maybe some magic mechanics like can rip the engine out quickly and throw a new one back in, but I imagine most mechanics will take their time, make sure the new one's running, make sure everything's working properly, check all your other things for that. I think it's kind of hard to see that when our work is mainly in the digital space. And so
Yeah.
digital, all of our brains like, oh, well, that's not tangible. I can't hold a video. I can't hold this and see how long this will
Yeah.
take. But for us, since we're so entrenched into that world, we know how long that'll take.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with my background going to school, my major was media communication, but my emphasis, like
Mhm.
my like for lack of better words, I guess my emphasis or area, I
Mhm.
really was really good and was digital communication, like digital media. So I
Mhm.
was really like entrenched with the digital, like you said, touching something that's not there. Like you can't hold a video or anything like that, but it's like creating something out of thin air kind of thing. It's like I bet something like
Exactly.
you, it's like you said you can't give like a mechanic a tool and like, hey, do this and like like unless you got like some kind of like tool magic tools or something I don't know anything
Yeah.
about. But then again, that's I don't know. That's neither here nor there, I guess. But um, but yeah. So like some people have like come up to me like, hey, I've got this video idea. We need that done like in an hour or two, right? I'm like, what do you mean? Like the recording process in an hour or two? We could probably do that, but the video's not going to be done in an hour or two. I promise
Mhm.
this video's not going to like beginning to end. It's going to take a good chunk of your day to do everything.
Yeah.
At least like me, because I'm a like I like ADD. I gotta like each podcast, probably this one too.
Mhm.
When I export it and download it, okay, I want the seconds down to this. I want the editing. I want make sure everything looks good, sounds good, kind of thing. But same thing. I guess I can understand that too. But
Yeah.
um, have you had like, guys, kind of change gears a little bit? Have you ever like had anybody, I guess, in this field that like you, I guess, feel whether if it's in college or even post college or anything like that, have you looked up to, or even someone who's influenced you?
Yeah. At my first job ever, I had a coworker, and I don't think he's a very secretive type of guy, so I'll just call him by his first name.
Okay.
His name was Paul. He was possibly one of like the best mentors I had. He really taught me a lot of good coding practices and just a lot of good ways to function as a developer and as a person. He held himself with a lot of confidence. He was a very quippy, funny guy, and I was very quippy too. And so I think that just kind of meshed well with each other.
Yeah.
Um, he'd really loved it at work when we had a messaging app system that we use. I can't even remember the name of it because like most other companies don't ever use this. This is just very much a startup kind of thing. Um, I changed my deal to Speedy Gonzales, and he's like, "That's fitting for you." He's like, "That's fitting for you, Speedy." And he just really taught me something that I've carried on into like all of my development space of, as a developer and as somebody as a software engineer, you want to do like the best that you can do. You want to get something to where it's running so optimally, so perfect. You want to craft a masterpiece every time you're coding. You don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So you have to hit a point of hitting, this is as good as I can get for the time that I have. So I need to do to the best of my ability for that time. And there's points you can just tell yourself, I need to let it go. I can't sit here perfecting this all day. This is just how it is. And I think that's something good that a lot of people take a long time to learn. And I know like swapping at my current company, I've been on 3 different teams now. And I think it's so vital for everybody on the team to know that, because it's very easy to go back and say, oh, I could have done this better. And if you have time to do that, do that. But if you do not have time to do that, do not go back and
Yeah.
start fixing everything, or you're going to make 30 more issues that you're going to have to put up with later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done that a lot too, where I'm like, I get so like in on doing something, like if it's like writing something or creating a video, I get so
Yeah.
like I do that. Like that's probably my biggest thing is like having to like pull away. Okay, don't have time for that. Let's come to it later if we have time, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Move on to the next thing. So that's pretty awesome. I mean, like for you, like, is there a so excuse me for being stupid, like not stupid, but like not understanding, I guess.
No worries.
Is there like is there a process for you to go in? Like when you go into coding, is there a process that you do that's different from someone else, or is it pretty much all the same?
Yeah, I think everybody approaches problems differently. For me, it also just depended on what teams I worked on. The first team I started out with the company I'm currently at, was just mainly fixing things that were broken on something that was already established. So it's going in, testing the page and saying, okay, when I click this button, it's doing nothing. Why is it doing nothing? So I have to go dig through, go trace back the issue and kind of narrow it down. So a lot of the times it was like, oh, this button's working if I have this checkbox clicked, but it's not working if it's not clicked. Why is it doing that? That's weird. And just kind of linking up issues to see what's really the root issue. For my current team, like past two teams, we've been converting an application for both of those that's going from a standalone app that you have to download to the web, to where you no longer have to download it. So that causes a bunch of issues. Um, the one I'm currently on actually is converted a COBOL program. So if you, COBOL is probably something you won't hear about a lot because it's very, very old, a very, very old programming language that most, if not every company now, does not use anymore. But a lot of old, really well-made apps still use it. And our company unfortunately had one of those. And so for me now, it's testing if we had some program that was written by a developer much smarter than me, that took that old code, converted it to newer code so we could read that and actually understand what it was saying. And now our main thing is testing it and making sure it matches as closely as possible to the uh, application-based version versus like the web-based version.
Oh, cool. So, I mean, when I look at, I've opened up a couple, so I opened up one software and I look at codes,
Mhm.
and I legit almost had a panic attack on like stuff is in there. I'm like, no, I exited out so
Mhm.
quick, and I'm like, the fact that there's people who approach this like so I don't know how to explain it. Like, there's people who out there who are a lot smarter than me, who go in there and actually create something out of nothing. I'm like, that's just so fascinating. I don't know why. It's like to explain. It's like, someone like, it's easy for me to go on Facebook or whatever and say like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, so and so said this. But it's like
Mhm.
there's people actually who like developed this, like out of nothing,
Yeah.
who created something like out of nowhere. That's how I thought that was always pretty cool. Like the whole process, like I guess quote like behind the scenes kind of thing,
Mhm.
of like there's someone who went into it and they created like there's a team behind something, the the team behind the team. I guess I don't know
Mhm.
if that makes any sense, but um, is there anything like in this field that like I guess in this what can't speak communicator major and can't speak. Um, so is there anything in this field particularly like makes you like excited?
Yeah. I'd say the main thing for me is the fact that I get to learn something new pretty much every day. It develops a different kind of beast where it's very much you're learning on the fly all the time. You're always learning something new, even if you think you're not, you are. Um, so it's always kind of a new issue popping up, new things coming up, you know. Clients figure out ways to break applications in ways you never would think they would. I can't tell you how many cases I've heard from me and other fellow developers from either at my company or different companies that like, yeah, somebody tried to save their name in a uh, field that asked for their telephone number and now everything's broke. So we have to go fix that. And it's just like, you never would think of these things popping up as issues, but they do. And so I think for me, it's always kind of that nice thought that I'm not just doing the same monotonous work every single day. And I think that's what keeps me so engaged. And with the company I've picked, they specifically really don't want you ever hitting like a burnout phase where you're just like, I feel like I'm hitting a lull. I'm doing the same thing every single day. And so they really push you to be like, if you want to try something new, let us know and we'll shift you to a team where you're doing something new. Um, Sometimes it is a double-edged sword because it's like you're looking at something like when I went over to my new team when I had to learn COBOL, and I swear by this, I do not understand half of what's going on when I'm reading that. It is like reading a completely different language to me, like not even just in a coding sense. It looks like a just completely different language. It's a lot to take in at once sometimes to where you're just a little overwhelmed and you're like, man, am I just dumb? Like all my coworkers are 30 miles ahead of me. But you have to remind yourself, especially as a developer, that everybody else also had to learn at some point too. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure if I answered the question there. I know I
Yeah,
kind of
it
went
was.
off on a tangent.
No, you're good. That was perfect. I mean, I go off tangents all the time. This podcast has no real rail, so no, please, yeah, you're fine. Like you said, there's always people, I guess, learning. Like you said, there's always someone who
Mhm.
had to learn somewhere. I mean, um, for the people out there who will learn this field and everything like that, what do you see your like what not see yourself, but what do you see like the computer science going in the future as a whole?
Yeah, I see computer science. It obviously will keep expanding, especially with just how integrated we all are with our technologies nowadays. You know, social medias, there's new ones popping up all the time. Like, I feel like a boomer now that everybody's been on Be Real and I haven't. I'm like, gosh, I feel like now I'm finally behind and I'm hearing more people using Be Real. I know TikTok was the huge one for a while. TikTok actually, I think for a bit overtook Google in being like the most used website, which is insane to think because you're like, how did this new app that came like just a while back after the ashes of Musically is now overtaking Google? Like you would not see this as something. So I think it'll always be a space that has jobs for people. I know with like AI, there's a fear that, oh, it's gonna phase out developers. I think most developers know and are fine with the fact that we know there's always going to be human tuning needed. If you've seen most AI art, for
Yeah.
example, there's always like that one bit where it adds like a third arm to somebody or just a random chunk of just something the AI kind of panicked and tried to make into
Yeah.
something. Um, I think it'll always require human touch in there. And I think that's something for CS majors to not worry too much about for job security. I know for some others it is worrisome, and I understand that. Um, but I really see it expanding and evolving, especially with the VR spaces getting bigger and bigger. Meta's pushing so hard into that. And other companies are finally starting to look at that as well. With the NFT stuff, I'm not the biggest fan of NFTs, but I can see that if maybe somebody figures out the best way to like market that to general public, the minute that these new technologies can start being marketed towards general public, that's even more jobs for CS majors out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can totally see that too. I mean, it feels like when you said Be Real, that's the first I think I've ever heard of it. I didn't even know what that was, to be honest with you. Like, is it like TikTok or what is it?
From what I understand, just kind of listening on, because I don't want to end up downloading 300 different apps to see the same things from people. Because,
There you go.
I think we both were in that generation when people had Instagram added stories and you're
Oh
seeing the
yeah,
same thing on Instagram and Snapchat. And you're like, which one do I check now? It's on
I know.
everything. To my understanding, what it does is it's kind of like Snapchat in that sense, where it's like a quick 24-hour story type deal, and it takes a video and photo from both your front and back camera on your phone, which is very interesting. I'm not really interested in using that. I know you can just post photos instead, but I'm just not the type that uses Snapchat anymore, so I don't really see much use in grabbing it. And TikTok has just added TikTok Now, which does the same thing as Be Real.
What?
So I think it's doing what Instagram did to Snapchat long ago, where we're just going to copy what they did to make sure they can't take our throne.
For sure. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of that going on nowadays. That's the
Yes.
first I've ever heard of Be Real. I mean, I'm 25. I remember back in the day when I was in high school, Vine was the thing, like the only
Hmm.
thing. I mean, and then TikTok came out, and I was like,
Hmm.
I call it there's been times where I've called TikTok Vine by accident,
Mhm.
just because I'm like it's so similar, you know. I mean, there's so many stuff coming out. I don't know what's really like. I don't know, like there's so many. There's like what am I trying to say? There's like a million and one things for what they say
Yes.
was like thing. Like, and like I'm not like I only have like three real social media things. That's Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok mainly. I'm not even on TikTok really.
Mhm.
So I mean that's it. I mean that's I have the bare minimum as much as if I can. But
Yeah.
for social media, I mean, do you see like a big like insurgence really lately? Like in everything at all, like, as far as like developing?
Um, like for social media, it's always, I feel like it's something that's always growing and always changing. Um, I know there's been a huge surge as of recent, especially just looking at like, think about back in like 2016 when I graduated high school. It is so crazy to think like so many new social media apps have come and gone in that time that some of them just came and went so quick we all forgot about them. Like you would have never thought Musically of all things would come back as a bigger, better app like TikTok. Like I remember people using Musically primarily in high school were just like kids singing and lip syncing. It was
Yeah.
when the big lip syncing phase was there. Um, I think it's a very interesting field to watch. I know I personally would not ever want to be in that side of development because it's so volatile.
Hmm.
Like looking at Twitter and their mass layoffs, Facebook and their mass layoffs, a lot of people thought these apps were so big they could never die. And we're starting to see that now where apps are getting so big and then getting hit with like giant FTC lawsuits or giant uh fines. Like Twitter's whole acquisition has just been kind of a dumpster fire. It's fun to watch, but it's very much a dumpster fire for lack of a better word. I wish no ill will on like any of the executives or Elon himself. I just feel like it was just a very chaotic decision.
Yeah. I
um,
can see that too. I mean, with Elon and everything, I was like, oh my God. Either way, I try to see myself like both sides of it just to make sense of like, okay, what's going on? It was just like you said, it was chaotic, I guess if that's a word,
yes.
pretty much so. But I mean, like you said, I graduated in 2016 too from high school
Hmm.
and everything like that. So like seeing so many like he said things come and go. I mean,
Hmm.
I can only imagine. I didn't even I think really realize like the like someone created that and then sometimes it doesn't really live up to the hype as long as people think.
Hmm.
And then it just like it fizzles off real quick and then there's okay, there's nothing really to do. Now what's next kind of thing for computer like people in your field. I mean, I was like, oh no, I didn't even think about that. You know, I mean,
Hmm.
like you said, there's really just a flash in the pan kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of just very odd to think because I think for so long we were all just kind of used to the status quo of it's just this way now.
Yeah.
And seeing, I think it's also been spurred on like post pandemic, a lot of companies started really looking at we need to make profit. We have just been sinking cost. A lot of social media companies are unfortunately just huge sunk costs on their bigger parent company or just on themselves. It's why you see a lot of, funny enough, like big companies like Google owns YouTube. YouTube is pretty much always operating at a loss, but it's good for a company like Google who makes just so much money. It's good to have a loss on your, your big area because a loss is a loss, but that means we can write off all the issues with our bigger
Yeah.
company who makes money and just blame it on the one who's losing. But for companies like Facebook and, well, I guess Meta now, it's so weird to
Yeah.
think that they changed their name. Um,
It still is to this day. I still think about it. I'm like, what's meta? Then I have to realize and okay, that's Facebook. Okay, that's what it used to be.
yeah. With Meta, they have to kind of make a profit at some point, when your main
Mhm.
sell is these products, Facebook, Instagram, and I think they also own WhatsApp now.
Oh yeah.
They have to kind of somewhat turn a profit at some point. So that's why you see these layoffs start popping up more and more. And unfortunately, during COVID, a lot of people were hired for positions that were very like, and I don't know if you've seen like these types on TikTok where they're like, I love my job as a software engineer. And it is not my day to day as a software engineer, where they're like blowing off work half the day and then showing up midday, which, hey, that's awesome. If that's your only work priorities, more to you, more power to you. But it's not too shocking to see people losing those positions when your job was really just coming in, clocking in for 5 minutes, doing three things, and then leaving.
Yeah. Does it is like stuff like that make it harder for someone like in your field, like with like a big like you said, like there's so many people going on and anything like that with does it add like a layer of like I don't know if you would say stress or what, but does it like make it harder that way? Like, okay, there's all these people like meta and everything like that, like who
Yeah.
expect expectations. Does it make it even like crazier or what? Like, what's it like? Take me to kind of through you like your thoughts about that.
Yeah. For me, being in my field, the type of company I work for only makes software for local governments. So like courts, municipals, and also I think we just acquired a company that does government work as well. Um, so that type of work, I chose it specifically because it wasn't social media, because I've just heard people that work at social media. It sounds like fun and games until it's not fun and games,
Yeah,
until you hit crunch week where you're working through Thanksgiving. It's also the same reason I personally, I love video games. Video games have been a huge part of my life since I was 5 years old, since I could literally hold a controller and use it. I would never work in video game development unless it was at a very small studio or just a passion project of mine.
for sure.
Um, just because a lot of those jobs, they paint a facade at first that this is fun, like this is how awesome it is. And I think that also attracts a lot of people who are just looking for easy, fun job that pays a ton. Because
Yeah,
how does that not sound good to anybody? But then you get in, and then a year later, you're laid off because the company was tanking, or you're laid off because just work was awful, or you're stuck there suffering now doing crunch. But hey, you get that free lunch every now and then.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's I've seen some stuff. I guess not a whole lot. I mean, you probably seen more because you're
Mhm.
obviously more involved in this field than I am. But I've seen some stuff like where people, like you said, they get into that area of like developing like whether it's like websites or apps or games or things of that nature.
Mhm.
They're creating like they're competing and computing, if I can say that right word right, and they're creating the code or anything for games or anything like that or just different stuff. I'm like, and then like you said, a year later they're laid off. I'm like, that's so crazy. I
Mhm.
think I've heard like just lately the biggest people I think I've heard was like I think because I love games too. Like I grew up playing games too,
Mhm.
like Dreamcast or that Nintendo 64. Those are the games I
Yeah.
played growing up all the time. And I have a PS4 somewhere behind me, and so I play games all the time. And playing games, like I can only imagine like if stuff gets like leaked or different stuff, like all
Mhm.
this different stuff, like and everything. Like I recently I just saw something with Grand Theft Auto, like the newest one. Stuff gets, they you see some like the leaks and anything like that. They're still like in the early trends of like putting everything together. Like it looks like they're still coding and everything like that still and everything
Mhm.
like that. I'm like, oh man, stuff like that really tanks the big corporations, stuff like
Yes.
that. I can only imagine like all the stuff like the after effects of like everything that's going to go on after.
Yeah. I think for like leaks like that, it's always really devastating to me as a fellow developer, because it's really sad. Teams that are working on projects like that, you really don't see like the fruit of your effort until the game's out and everybody
Mhm.
gets to play it, and you get the real reviews of people saying, "Oh my God, this game's awesome," or "Oh, this game's just terrible." So I think for Rockstar, especially being such a large company, having a huge leak like that, it just sours the water so much. And I just imagine for so many developers, you see people online, there's a lot of armchair developers out there that
Mhm.
think they understand how development works when they obviously don't. I saw the main criticism for obviously like early game footage, which is supposed to look bad because it's not done yet.
Yeah.
Um, it's like looking at a cake before it's finished and saying that looks bad. Well, yeah, it looks bad. It's not cooked. um, and they saw like, and I'm not sure if you saw any of those clips as well, where like the game was popping up things like saying, "Oh, this action's happening right now. This is happening." Like
uh,
all the text. That's actually for development side to tell us, "Hey, this worked. This worked. This worked." Because when you're playing that game, you really don't think about that. And it's very interesting for me. It's why I almost went into video game development. Just the stress alone deterred me from it.
yeah. I
um,
understand that.
yeah. um, but it's very interesting to think like when you're playing a video game, like I'm trying to think of like a good example. I guess I'll just use GTA. When you walk in up to a car, you hit a button, you expect to go into the car. Well, development, when we're developing that, we have those triggers and console logs to tell us like, okay, they opened this, that animation worked, the character got in the car, and then the car was able to use like the controls swapped from like regular like moving around to car controls. And so you're just making sure all those work, and you're not like the car's not clipping through the ground, the character didn't fly in the air or something crazy happen. It's all just to prevent bugs and make sure things are running properly. It's just making sure, because the way coding is, it's just a set of instructions. So with video games, it's mainly just you walk into an area. For most open world games, it's your character has the basic functions of up, left, right, down, jump, punch, whatever. And then two special cases. So like GTA, you see a car, you can get in a car. GTA, you find a gun on the ground, you can pick up the gun. It's things like that you don't really think about also have to be coded. It doesn't just magically do it itself. So there's just so much little intricacies there. And for them with like these big video game engines as well, there's actual like physicists that have to come in and calculate how things fall. Because you ever think about like the cars kind of fall like not super realistically to real life, but kind of close, like close enough to where you're not like, that's weird. Why did my car go flying in the air 3,000 feet and keep flying? There's some form
Yeah.
of gravity in the game that keeps it realistic and grounded. So there's people working on that aspect. There's people working on making the character models look really good. In which for those GTA leaks, I have to say those character models look amazing already. And the fact that they're already this far, and I know Rockstar is probably going to be another 2 or 3 years before they release the game, it's going to look amazing when it comes out. So I think people need to hold their breath a bit and just be patient and wait.
Wow, that's a really great breakdown. I like you said, when you were talking about that, I'm like, I was sitting here thinking like, wow, I've played that game for years, and
Mhm.
I've never really realized. But there's like, I guess like walking through a door, like for GTA, I
Mhm.
guess to use your example, like we were talking about earlier, like just simply walking through a door to go into from outside to inside, or just picking something up simply. I've never really
Mhm.
realized like, wow, that just there's coding just right there. That's that one
Yes.
thing alone. I never really realized. I was like thinking about, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, I obviously knew there's developers and things like
Mhm.
that, but like just doing something so simple, like there's like all this different stuff for developing and everything like that behind the scenes that I don't really pay a whole lot of detail to, I guess. Like, I guess as much as before. But moving forward, don't get me wrong, I want to be looking for all that in games or anything like that too. Cause like, oh, Abby told me about that, blah blah blah, and everything like that. So that's pretty cool. But like you said, the leaks too. I saw some of that when I heard
Mhm.
that. I'm like, when I first heard the news, I guess whenever it broke, I'm like, oh no, it's gonna be crazy. I mean, like that's horrible. And then obviously the next thought was like, but what does it look like though? Kind of thing,
Mhm.
for me. I don't know why I was like one of those people, I guess, who fell into the trap, like, oh, well, but what does it look like? I mean, when I pulled up some of the
Mhm.
videos and pictures and anything like that, you see some of the people like crouching or doing all this different stuff, and
Mhm.
you're like you said, you see all the different like colors and everything of and
Mhm.
actions of telling them, okay, this person needs to go here or throw this or pick this up, whatever. And when he said that, I'm like, oh, that makes so cool. I mean, there's people out there developing A to Z what they need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, we were talking about kind of like social media and stuff earlier too. Like talk about kind of like us change paths. I'm sorry, a little bit.
It works.
So like along with working in your field, I mean, how have you seen like social media like us impact our generation? You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but if you want to
Yeah.
go into more detail about it, like you said, like because you and I are we have similar in age and everything like that. We kind of grew up
Mhm.
in this generation. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, how social media's impact our generation?
Yeah, I think social media has had an overall like very big impact on our generation. I think you see a lot more women, especially like I sorry to focus like on just natural women things,
You
but
know,
like
good.
it's hard not to, or even too with minorities, being like half Hispanic myself. You see a lot more things online that like it feels like sometimes you're like in an echo chamber where you're just hearing a lot of bad things and you're like, oh my gosh, this happened to this horrible event happened to this Hispanic family because they're Hispanic, or this horrible event happened to this Black or Asian family because they're this, or not even just that, like to just personal individuals. And then for women, it's constantly, oh, this poor girl like has this eating disorder. Like you, I'm sure you've seen her before, like Eugenia Cooney,
Mhm.
the media lambasted her for the longest time, and just other YouTubers. I lump them into media too, because they're part of the social media aspect of it all. Um, and you really think about like, man, I never really worried about these issues till like the internet made me worry about it. But it's
Yeah.
almost in a toxic relationship where I'm a bit too worried about these issues, where I see it all the time. And I think it, especially with COVID, affected a lot of people's mental states. Because it just felt like the entire time you're hearing just things are getting worse, things are getting worse. And then last year when Ukraine got attacked by Russia, we were all just kind of sitting there like, oh my God, are we about to witness World War III? Like, what
Yeah.
is going on at this point? And it's so surreal to think that like 10, 20 years ago, if a world war had just started, we'd only hear about it on the news. You wouldn't hear about it 24/7 from
Yeah.
the device you have on you every single day. The radio and stuff would tell you, but you have the ability to turn the radio off. It feels like sometimes it's really hard to disconnect from your phone and say, I need to take a mental break. I need to step away from this. But I think social media does have a very good impact on some people. I see a lot more social medias now trying to work towards pushing people to get off them.
Hmm.
Like Google implemented a new thing with their Android phones that's called the heads up feature, where if like you're walking around in public, it'll tell you, hey, look up every now and then, so you don't like, because there's been numerous accounts of people just walking in manholes in like New York,
No.
and just people walking into car accidents. It's so crazy to think, but I'm sure you've seen this too, where you're
Mhm.
just going to a grocery store and there will be like a random person just walking in front of you with their phone, and you'll see them almost get hit by a car, and you're like, they didn't even see that.
No.
Like they're just so hooked to their phone
Yeah.
right now. And I don't want to sound like the older generation, like these kids and their da da da's, because they're
Yeah.
just as bad sometimes.
For sure. For
um,
sure.
but I think preservation of a lot of history is also really cool to see right now. Um, like now we have full logs, like Twitter itself. I think while I'm not a big fan of the app does have a lot of history to it. Like there was an entire presidency where we had a president constantly tweeting from it, which is just the
Yeah.
strangest thing to think. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'll let other people decide.
Yeah.
But for like families per se, like with my sisters, with their kids growing up, they have been able to catalog their babies growing up and their kids. And um it's such a sweet thing to see during the day when I see people sharing like, oh, this was 3 years ago when my baby was just a baby. And it makes you warm and fuzzy and reminds you, in Facebook and all of them used to be more about the positivity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen, like you said, a lot of stuff too. I've been obviously, I feel like in our generation, we obviously get lumped in there sometimes.
Mhm.
And with me being a communications major, that was my whole college career is learning how to learn, like, us put stuff onto media, social media and
Mhm.
stuff like that, like create content for stuff, because in communications, it's such a broad degree,
Mhm.
and you're not just like fixated on just one thing. Like you're not just a journalism major. You could go into graphic design, you can go into production, like whether it's video or audio. So there's so many different things you can go into,
Mhm.
and just learning like, okay, I gotta learn how to create something that's gonna go shared onto social media. And sometimes there's people out there who just aren't too social media or what's the word I'm trying to, like, guess, heavy, But there
Mhm.
are people, I think he's at the grocery store, just at United or whatever, just walking the street. They
Yeah.
got their thing on their phone, like right here, and like, oh my God, like in my head, I'm like, okay, come on, guys, I gotta get some milk or something, gotta go do something. But like you said, I think it's really from, like you said, the older generations, I guess, who just, you said, the only information they got was what they were told. Now it's
Mhm.
through radio and newscasts, back in the day, like, stuff like that is so like crazy. Like they're like, I think with the innovation of social media, I think it's only made it crazier. You said
Mhm.
COVID's only made it worse, I think, in a
Yeah.
way. So yeah, it's made it crazy too. But yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I guess both sides. I guess pre-COVID and post-COVID, like you kind of see both sides of it. I'm only on social media just because like I'm here to talk about my podcast, and I
Yeah.
kind of I just easily dip. I'm like, okay, I got a new podcast, and I'm out, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And that's the only reason why I use social media. But other than that, I'm like, nope, I'm not saying here. Okay, I need to get out of this rabbit hole as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to have, especially like being in our age group, because they really, a lot of social media is the main part of this economy for them now is keep users on as long as possible. Like I'll catch myself, I'll self admit that I have wasted possible days just sitting on TikTok scrolling and then look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, the whole day's passed and I've just been sitting here
Mhm.
watching dumb videos like all day. Um, the main thing these algorithms want to do to keep users on is to keep feeding you things that are entertaining. It's kind of why if you've ever like take a chance to like really pay attention, like see what Instagram feeds you versus what TikTok feeds you versus what Facebook feeds you. It's kind of different what experiences they all want to give you. Instagram is just very much like, look at these pretty pictures and cool videos. Like, don't you want to
Mm.
see all this cool stuff? TikTok's very like, sit here and just kind of take a passenger seat while we travel you down this line of either things that'll like really rile you up, things that'll make you laugh, things that'll just interest you, just kind of I guess flicking through the television type experience. And then Facebook, where it's like, oh, you get some updates about family. But I'm not sure if you know this. The way Facebook's algorithm is designed is if you've ever paid attention, like if you ever pay attention when opening the app initially, within I think the second or third post, you'll see a news article typically. And typically that news article will be something that's purposely cherry picked to kind of piss you off.
Yeah, I've
And
seen
so
that.
they'll want you to stay longer because they want you to sit and argue in the comments. Because we all know Facebook comments are probably, I get a kick out of sitting and watching older generations argue because it's just so funny to me that people can just become so upset about so many little
Something.
things.
Yeah.
It's my personal like self-indulgent. I think it's like the equivalent to like most people that watch reality TV.
For sure, for
um,
sure.
we all have to watch a little what's the show, 90 Day Fiance or Bad Girls Club or something like that.
Yeah.
We all self-indulge in just trashy behavior. um while we might not participate, it's fun to watch. But it's just so crazy to think that some apps are just really designed to very much feed into like putting you in a bad mindset so you stay there longer because you're like, well, now I got to keep looking. I'm going to keep looking. You know, I think it's why there's such a huge resurgence with people. I know like in the 2000s people are very obsessed with like murder movies and stuff, but now it's very much murder documentaries in recent years, like where people are very obsessed with like what's going on there. And we've seen
Mm.
cases like Gabby Petito, I think was her name,
Oh
when
yeah.
she got abducted. It felt like the whole world was trying to find this girl, and it's so crazy to think that that wouldn't happen 10 years ago.
Mm-mm.
We would have heard about it on national television maybe, and then that would have been it. That would have been the one, you know, snippet in a newscast, and then that's it.
Yeah.
um but with social media nowadays, there's so much, people just want to keep feeding into it. I think it's also with like the war in Ukraine right now. We were all kind of sitting there, you know, refreshing all of our feeds to see what's going on because it's just so weird to see perspectives from people actually living there, taking video, showing what was going on. You know, you just get hooked because you're that curious, and maybe it's the morbid curiosity in all of our brains that you just want to keep watching. You know, it's like the old saying of everybody watches a train wreck even if you don't want to.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a big part of it too, because I think I've done stuff where I've seen people or even myself are like, okay, what's I've read those comments too, like this kind of like he said,
Yeah.
rating, like I guess that's like a version of reality TV in a way, like
Yeah.
Jersey Shore or something like that. Same thing, like the same satisfaction you get out of it. You read it, it's like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. You start reading, like, what am I doing? Like 10 minutes later, like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? And then you realize, I realized, okay, okay, I need to get out of here before, I gotta go do something else productive. But we said to you, like you said, it's always that, I think, that morbid curiosity in a way. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, it's like what's for, like you said, watching a train wreck or even an accident. Like you're kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't want to see what's going on. Like you see an accident on the side of the road, you kind of like what's the word, like rubbernecking, like, oh, like what's going on kind of thing,
Yeah.
like kind of thing, like I don't want to know what's going on, but what's going on kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, you
Um,
see the police lights and you're instantly slowing down because you're like, I like you're slowing down naturally because the cops are there, but you're also
yeah,
slowing down because you're like, what the heck is going on over there?
for sure. I always do that too. Like even if the cops like driving behind me, I'm always like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm that internal dialogue the whole time, like, be careful, don't do anything wrong. Look for lights. Look the like, it's always that same thing too. I mean, the lights don't even have to be on for me to like make sure something's going on. You know, like sometimes I'll be like driving, I'm like, is that a cop car behind me or no? So I try to
Mhm.
play it safe. I'm like, okay, not that I was doing anything bad. Even if I'm driving stuff, like, okay, just play it cool. Just play it cool, Carter. You're doing good. You're not doing anything wrong. Yeah, I think that's even with social media. I think that's a big thing going on too. It's like making sure
Mhm.
like that curiosity factor is always like it's. I think gets the best of people. I think too in a
Mhm.
way it's like even especially with like our parents' generation and beyond maybe. You know, I think it's always that because this is something new to them in a way. You know, not new,
Mhm.
but like they didn't have this when they were our age. You know,
Yeah.
so it's like they don't know like the like you said the algorithms and stuff of that nature. So they see something like pop up like what blah 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 blah, and they start making the comments that we read. You
Yeah.
know, but uh, yeah, that's so crazy. I mean, why? I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you this too. I think why do you think like why does social media have like a big overlap in our field? Because I feel like kind of talking to you about it, it feels like there is like a little bit of overlap in our field, you know, because you said you're programming or encoding all this different stuff, and I'm the one that's kind of like my I say I like I'm the person for all of communications. I'm not, but like my field, like we're kind of the ones that like kind of go overlap and hand in hand with each other.
Mhm.
Do you first one, do you see that, and two, if you do, like, why do you think there's such a big overlap?
Yeah. I think there's always, well, not always, but there's a good overlap mainly just due to the fact like social media sites are typically made like look at Apple made by two nerdy guys in a garage and I think in California, maybe New Mexico, I can't remember exactly.
I think that sounds
Um
right.
yeah. Um two nerdy guys. We all know nerds aren't the best about marketing themselves or knowing how to market, and so they go to people who better understand that, and then business people go to somebody who better understands that
Yeah,
because
for
they can
sure.
sell it. The media communication people actually make it look good to sell, if that makes sense. I hope I'm not like butchering like what your side does, but
No,
um I think it just works that way because there has to be somebody who sells the product. There can be an amazing product out there. And we've seen this time and time again with like good inventions where like electric cars, they didn't become popular till Elon Musk like made a company, made the cars look slick, made them not look like, giant batteries that you plug in.
yeah.
um, making it more marketable, making it more slick, that takes somebody else's touch. The
Mhm.
smart people can sit all day and act like we can make something really good. We can make it good. We can't make it look good.
For sure. I mean, I don't know anything about marketing either. Don't get me wrong. I took
Yeah.
some marketing classes, but like, you might as well sign me up for a wrestling class, you know, because it feels like I don't know anything. Like, like when it comes to like even coding, like you think marketing is wrestling, writing is like coding, all that's like
Mhm.
a different language from a different universe. It's like I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on at all. So I mean, for me, it feels like you said too, like there's so many people I think who can like create like for the coding side, like you got it kind of right to like who have this
Mhm.
idea for something, and then they don't need to go to someone like you said, marketer or someone in marketing, make it all this and all that. And I felt like if someone's like, sorry, train of thought, squirrel moment. Sorry, feels like if someone like you said, if Abby was creating
Mhm.
something, like, and then she came to me, if you came to me, whatever, and was like, hey, I have this idea, but how are you gonna, make it noticeable? I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
blah blah. What's your idea? Blah blah blah. We'll sit down and talk about it and create this thing about it and just kind of make it, hopefully, known or anything like that. So, like you said, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head on that. It felt like it's right. That's the right way approach of doing it. I feel like there's always
Mhm.
someone out there who has an idea for something, and they just go above and beyond, and they need to maybe can't speak. Sometimes they need help to get that message out there, you know.
Hmm.
It's always like there's a message or something out there that needs to be heard, you know. And sometimes it just needs one or more people to a couple of people just to make it heard, you know.
Yeah.
That's yeah, but yeah. So what kind of a couple more questions before I'll head out, but thank you for your time again. Um, well, what potential do you think the social media have for future generations do you see?
I think it has a lot of potential for future generations. I think with like cataloging a lot of these, like this new generation growing up, I can say most, if not all of them, have a picture out there already of them as like a child growing up. So it's going to be very interesting to see them be able to go back when they're older and be like, oh, I remember this. And, we think about pictures that we have as we're kids, and you have to go physically find those
Yeah.
pictures or videos or in anything. And, it's harder to preserve that physical media somewhere. And it's kind of nice to think that these kids will have like an area where they can go back and they're like, oh, what did I do as a 3-year-old? And like their aunt or uncle will be like, oh, I have all these videos when you were a kid,
Mhm.
and show them how goofy and silly they were. So it'll be a very interesting experience, because I think a lot of us forget how we acted as a kid sometimes. Um, I think for them, I'm hoping that parents stay good about like keeping kids off social media too much. I think they can use it to an extent. I think there's some that they definitely shouldn't use. The TikTok's just a bit too addictive for kids.
Yeah.
I've seen it's the same thing with like YouTube Kids, how kids were just absolutely hooked to that and just watching and never getting off. You don't want to have your kid hooked to this social media device that like they have to have all the time. But I think it can be used for school and stuff. Like you see a lot more schools adopting kind of their version of social media, where the moms can go see their grades, go see do conferences with their teachers. I can see that type of technology really evolving. As a kid that grew up with dyslexia, I used an app called Lexia when I was little that helped me with my dyslexia and learning how to
Cool.
read and write. So I really am glad for a lot of special needs students that there will be like software readily available. While I know at like lower income districts, they might not be able to have the access to have like a very specialized special needs teacher who can help that student. The fact that that software at least will be there for them will help them leaps and bounds. That information is out there somewhere that they can at least have that aid in. I think they're probably going to be one of the smartest generations we've seen.
For sure.
I know a lot of people would get kind of chop my head off for saying that, but it's kind of statistically already been proven. Like I've watched my nephews growing up and how much they're learning at school compared to like what we learned, and I just feel dumb because I'm like, I don't remember learning that at that age. I don't
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
I feel like I took a lot longer with a lot of these concepts. And it's just watching this generation and being really excited for what they can do. There's seniors graduating now with like close to enough hours to get a bachelor's degree. Well, I think that might be somewhat of a double-edged sword in some cases, because some kids are really forcing themselves into a job field that they might end up not liking. I do think it can serve some benefit to at least have like those early college credits. So you're not just going into college with nothing, you'd haven't ever experienced college. Um, I think that helps a lot. A lot of kids transition better to college. Um, and I think with social medias and all of that growing as much as they are, and just applications in general, I think college will continue to grow with that. I hope academia keeps up with it. I know
For
academia
sure.
is very stubborn in its ways with certain things. Um, I think we'll see a lot more. Like I imagine there's going to be a lot more media communications majors only specialize. Like I could see some only specialize in specific apps. Like this is the type of apps you do. This is the type of social
Yeah.
medias you do. I think it'll be evolving with a lot more specialties for certain jobs. We'll see too what apps really had the mainstay and what didn't. Because in 10 years, Facebook could be gone for all we know, or 10 years, Facebook could be even bigger than it is now. Um, I think it's a very promising generation to watch. I think it's a very promising future to watch. I think for our generation, the good thing, at least technologies is advancing a lot medically in all of that sense. Like today I was since I was feeling kind of yuck, I did a quick little telehealth thing with the doctor and got prescribed some cough medication. And it's so crazy to think how much easier that is to do now. You know, when we were kids, you had to go to the hospital,
Yeah.
sit with a bunch of sick people in a waiting room and wait to
Yeah.
get told, yeah, you're sick. And now you're sicker because you just sat by a bunch of other sick people.
It's like, yeah, you're sick. I'm like, yeah, I knew that. That's why I'm here. But yeah,
um,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I kind of cut you off there. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna finish on the point. I think just the ease of convenience for a lot of us is gonna get better. Um, I do believe with like VR and stuff getting bigger, I feel like there will be kind of a big break off in some generations where you'll see people who really dive into, I want to be in social media all the time. You know, I'm just going to hook up in a VR headset and go into the matrix. And I think
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of other people, which I'm going to be in this camp, that are like, I like social medias every now and then, but I'm going to stay in the real world to kind of be in the real
Have
world.
an even balance to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen people out there who, like in my field, who go in and like they're like, okay, like what's the analytical stuff, like the numbers stuff behind, like, hey,
Mhm.
what's this, the XYZ of this post or things of that nature. For me, I fall into it too sometimes every now and then. I try not to. I'm like, okay, this podcast is going out, blah blah blah, and
Mhm.
and like a 7 day span. Okay, it's got this many reads or this many impressions and blah blah blah. And then that wouldn't be there if it wasn't probably for computer science people. Like
Yeah.
building something, like finding that, doing all, like knowing all that stuff. Like that's going to be a big overlap, and I think that's kind of like you said too, like I think the future generations are probably, or there's a big promise, if they, like
Mhm.
for those people, these younger generation people. I think you said, dude, there's going to be so much more than I think we ever know, because there's going to be something
Mhm.
developing that we may not even know about, and then so I think it's going to be a big, 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 I think, promise, big thing and positive thing going on in the future. But kind of to close this out, do you have any like, and I what's the word, like I guess, what do you have to say for people out there who like us, who are wanting to go into it? Like, do you have anything to say for people out there who are considering this degree? Like, what are your words to those people?
Yeah. Um, for anybody who is considering computer science, I'll just say from a person who graduated from a very small town, my background was absolutely terrible. I started out at junior college. I took pre-calculus, barely scraped by and got a C, took calculus, got a C, and I hit a point where I was like, I can either choose to do this major and let these however many math classes keep me from doing it, or just do it. And I buckled down. I got a B in my calculus 2 class and then an A in my calculus 3, which most students don't do that where
Oh,
they go
wow.
upwards in the grade. They most go down.
That's
um oh sorry.
oh shit. I was gonna say how awesome that is. I mean, there's no way I was gonna take calculus. I barely passed college algebra. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries. For me, I had to pretty much teach myself all of my mathematics. Like I just had that bad of, and I'm not going to blame my school that much. It was a town that had a lot of lower income students, so it's hard for a teacher to teach to every student type when you have so many that are just behind no matter what. Um, but for me, I think what kept me in it is reminding myself that just because I don't know it now doesn't mean I can't learn it. And I think for a lot of people who are really would make amazing computer scientists, who would make amazing developers, software engineers, heck, even if you got it and just went into IT, don't deter yourself just because you're afraid of the big scary classes on the curriculum. Because I know they look big and scary, but you take it kind of one bite at a time. It's like the old saying of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Um, you can either let the one weed out class kick you out of an entire major that you were like, oh, this would be awesome for me. This would be great. Um, you could let that one class tear you away from that. And then 10 years later, you're going to be like, gosh, why didn't I do that? Because I've met so many people. Like, gosh, my optometrist the other day of all people was like, man, I wish I went into that field. I was just too scared to because it was so hard. And you wouldn't think to hear that from an
Yeah.
optometrist.
Yeah. For sure.
um, I just say follow the dream that you want to follow. Like this just goes for any major. Follow what you want to follow while you can and while you're stubborn.
That's
And oh, go ahead.
you
Sorry.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. My bad.
No worries. No, my brain, I pause and then I'm like trying to catch my thoughts as I'm doing it. um, Follow the dreams that you want to follow while you're stubborn, because at some point you hit a point where you're like, okay, this is it. I'm done. I don't want to try anything new. You know, we all get old and stubborn, unfortunately, or old and lose that young stubborn where we just get the old stubborn of, I don't care to
Yeah,
learn anything new. I'm going
for
to
sure.
stay stagnant now.
Yeah.
Um, and some people never get that, and then that's great. But do it while you feel like you can try it at least, because at least try it before you just swear it off. Because for me, I tried CS. I got really scared after that first semester and getting literally, I only had two B's and a C, I think, or maybe three B's and a C. And I was like, gosh, am I an idiot? I in high school I was getting A's and B's and not trying, and like I'm struggling to get B's now. Um, don't swear yourself off. Everybody has a bad semester. I know this from like experience. If you want to try it, especially if you're a young woman and you're afraid of being in a major of only men, do it. Like the guys will eventually get to the point where they're actually asking you for help in a lot of
Yeah.
things. And you know, if you're like the nerdy quiet guy, still do it, because people will still probably come ask for you for help eventually. You'll be
Yeah.
surprised as you're going through the major how much you actually know and how much you'll end up tutoring people. I'll say from experience, I think I was a lot further ahead than most of the other Texas Tech graduates at the time when I transferred into tech, or not the graduates, but the other students at the time, because my community college was so rigorous in its fundamental programming classes that I actually knew a lot more. Like one of my professors, she had shoved uh all of a different level CS class into one. And so taking those two same classes pretty much at the same time, it was brutal,
Mhm.
but that was the good kind of brutal that you
Yeah.
needed to be like, if you're going to do this major, this is it. Like, this is what you're doing. And I got to tech and I was like, gosh, I'm just taking the same three classes again and again, aren't I?
Yeah.
And not trashing on the curriculum, but you hit a point where you're in. My coding mentor, Paul, had told me this. He's like, you hit a point where you're kind of like, this professor's going to keep telling you a bunch of stuff like, this is how this works. And you're going to be like, okay, old
Mhm.
man, like, it's not really
Yeah.
that way. I know how this works.
Yeah.
um, but take what's interesting to you. I took a lot of network communication classes. Cybersecurity has always been something that interests me. It still goes completely over my head. Don't worry. It's way more math based than I originally thought. And that's what kind of
Yeah.
made me back out of it, because I was like, I don't want to do more math. My math has now been deleted from my brain. Um, Take what's interesting to you, take what you find um, fruitful for your mind. Uh, don't focus on what's popular at the time, because a lot of what's popular can end up dying off eventually.
Right.
I'm trying to remember the exact example, but there's something right before like AI and stuff was the big push that a lot of people were doing, and then AI became the big push, and it was like, oh well, everybody left this thing, so great, I'm out of a job because everybody's going on to AI now. Or with social media, a lot of people were really focused on learning programming languages that are specifically designed for standalone apps. So it's like, well, now you need web dev experience because now you're 5 years behind everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I did some of that same stuff too. I mean, in a way, I
Mhm.
just getting out there and learning experience. It feels like just doing something to like, to learn something. Like, what am I trying to say here? Really going out there, like learning something new and pushing yourself.
Mhm.
That kind of thing too. I mean, when I was a junior college, I took, I think, I don't know if it was in the same semester or like right, like one after the other. I had to take, because I was a general studies major, I had to take, of course, basic classes like like history, English, all those classes.
Mhm.
So I had to take a college algebra class, which thankfully I only had to take one. I was so happy I only had to take one math class,
Mhm.
and so I passed that class. I had to take another computer class because I was a general studies major, so I had to take this computer class. I took it, not real. I thought it was gonna be like a keyboarding type, like that, like
Mhm.
learning like stuff like that. But when I got into it, it was like, okay, you got to learn algorithms. I'm like, what are you talking about? Do I sign up for the right class? Like, what's going on? And then I had to look at my schedule and like ask the teacher. I'm like, after the first day, I'm like, is this the right class? He goes, yeah, you're signed up. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay then. So like, I walked out of there with a B, and I was so surprised. I
Mhm.
thought I was gonna get a C, like a C at best. Like I really
Yeah.
thought I was gonna get like a C, like a 70 something. I was so surprised, but I was like, but like you said, being in a room like that, learning from someone, like is sitting with someone who actually knows what they're talking about, and like I was like the best thing ever. Like just, like you said, doing like not what's popular now, just learning. Okay, just lenity or like do something like to like learn something from someone. Go out of your way, kind of thing. So,
Mhm.
um, thank you so much, Abby, for coming onto the podcast. I had a lot of fun. Thank
Yeah.
you. I learned a lot of stuff from you too.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't me being too wordy. I know sometimes
No.
I can end up going a bit graduate student in talking like very high level by accident. Um but yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I've really honestly never done something like this before. Being honest is like a CS major, we all kind of have imposter syndrome. So we're like, oh, we're not important. We don't do anything cool. It makes me feel a bit better about like my life accomplishments when other people are like, oh, yeah, that's very interesting. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not boring.
No, you're not boring at all. I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, just sitting here thinking about it, I'm just trying to take it all in. Like, that's pretty cool. I didn't hear anything. Like, I didn't know most of this. I'm like just hearing
Yeah.
like you said, your take on it. Like hearing it one thing from like a undergraduate level, going to like a grad student like yourself. I was just hearing
Mhm.
it like different things. I'm like, this is more in depth. This is really cool. Like hearing about it. So I mean, like you know, I mean, what you do is really important too. I mean, just hearing all
Mhm.
that is pretty cool too. So the fact that like you were able to come on, like, oh, this is so cool. Like this is so neat. Like learning about a car in Grand Theft Auto 5, you made
Mhm.
that interesting for me to hear as a communication student. Like from everything else and like the impact of social media, like everything that you're taking, I was like, huh, that's a different perspective. That's pretty cool.
Mhm.
So that's pretty cool. I mean, thank you again. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah.
So train of thought. Sorry, I do have ADD. So the inattentive form of ADD. So like, yeah, thank you again for everything. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and everybody listening or watching, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend too. So, Abby, thank you again.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, bye.
Bye.